Hello everyone, welcome to the new episode of Professionals Unplugged. My name is Utkarsh Shukla and today we have Claire with us. Claire, thank you so much for joining in.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here calling in from a very hot Australia.
So let's start with a very hot question. Can you please introduce yourself to our audience, like who you are, what work you do?
Thank you. Well, I've been a psychologist for 35 years, in fact. It's hard to imagine that. And I've worked in all sorts of areas all over the world, helping people, step into their power, I guess, and also make a contribution to the world. So I would now describe myself as a vegan psychologist, a communications trainer and coach and author, really. And I'm located in Australia.
That's really great, and this is something new I am hearing, vegan psychologist. So can you just give us a brief about this, like what it is, how it is different from a normal psychologist or a clinical psychologist?
Yes, of course. Well, I think many psychologists, focus on a specific area. Maybe they work with mental health or illness. They work with drug and alcohol or family issues, family relationships. A vegan psychologist is someone who works with vegans. Now, it's obviously they don't come to talk about a fussy diet. So let's just define what a vegan is. A vegan, it's not about eating plant-based or diets or anything like that. It's someone who really lives under the principle of ahimsa, actually, which of course is an Indian concept of doing no harm. It's a philosophy of, I would say, loving kindness towards ourselves, other people, all other animals and ecosystems. So a vegan psychologist is helping people come to terms with our human supremacy, really, and the way in which we use, exploit, eat animals because really of our traditions and habits, and in the process actually cause enormous suffering. So it's really working with those people who really want to work through their own anguish around that, but also to, tell other people really it's not about a diet, is although your health will be enormously impacted positively if you eat properly, but also just to have a kind of footprint on the earth, really.
That's really great, and I can say that why you choose this profession, because I can easily see a dog behind you, and I can guess you are a nature lover, right?
Yes,
So
that's right. No dogs are eaten in this house.
that's great, and there should not be.
No, exactly.
So what was your main reason to choose a vegan psychologist? Because vegan is something that become popular in the last few years, right? It was not pretty much popular in the early 2000s or in the mid 90s, right? So how did you find like this is the main aim, main path for you or main career for you in terms of psychologist?
Sure. Well, I think you're absolutely correct to say the name vegan has become more widespread and known. However, of course, it's now being misused by companies who want to make a lot of money out of it, or governments who want, or industries who want to laugh and ridicule and stop people, you know, from changing their habits, and their buying habits as much as anything. But the concept of veganism is actually a very old one. It was first labeled back in the 1940s in the UK by the Vegan Society. And they started off calling themselves a vegetarian society, but their values were more aligned with what would be vegan these days. In other words, it was about the emancipation of animals, non-human animals, but also their exploitation for testing on products, for instance, like pharmaceuticals or cosmetics or religious sort of exploitation or military exercises. The extent to which animals are used is really quite extraordinary. And so it has been known for a long time. And I became vegetarian actually in 1979. So I was vegetarian for 30 years before I realized that if I wanted to do everything to not use or exploit animals, I had to become a vegan, which meant not eating the products, which I thought were okay. But actually, there's a lot of suffering goes into that. So if somebody seeks someone out, it's because they've become aware of something that the majority of people don't really know about. We've been lied to enormously about what is, how well animals are looked after. And in fact, they're not when they're seen as property, like by organizations and things.
Yeah, I think there is a very thin line between being vegan and being vegetarian, like the product you mentioned, especially the dairy products. If I talk in brief, right? Like
Yes.
vegetarians generally have the dairy products, and while vegan people they try to avoid it, right? So that's really
Yes.
something that separates both vegan and vegetarians. And in terms of challenges, what were the biggest challenges that you have faced, like being in this profession, or how it has hampered your personal or professional life?
Yeah. Well, I think it's fair. I mean, I became a vegan. I didn't even, the lovely thing is, and this is where is the philosophy very clearly, is I became a vegan 18 years ago with my husband, and when we discovered some of the things we didn't even know, we couldn't believe we didn't know. I'll talk about those if you want me to. But we just knew we didn't want to do anything that would contribute to animal suffering when we didn't need to. So this is the beauty of it. So somebody had to tell me that we had become vegan, and that's the difference, I think, where people try to adopt a name but the biggest issue for me is working as a psychologist and coming across professionals like psychiatrists or doctors, sending people to see me who actually were vegan for ethical reasons, but they gave them 3 diagnoses. And this is probably the biggest challenge I had. They said that they had eating disorders. Now, some vegans do have eating disorders, but it's not because they don't want to eat animals. That's because they don't want to harm them or take their lives. They also said they had social adjustment disorders because they didn't eat the normal foods that family ate, or traditions, or could be Diwali, it could be anything, it could be Christmas, Easter, and Thanksgiving. They felt upset by that because they knew what had gone into get the animal on the plate. And then the psychiatrists also, and this was most concerning to me really, is they labeled vegans as having such low self-esteem that they were self-harming themselves by watching footage from animal cruelty videos like slaughterhouses and things. And that made me very angry, because you've got someone who has just become sensitive and aware and doesn't want to hurt animals, and then they've been told they're mentally ill and they're not fitting into society and they've got an eating disorder. And in fact, it's even worse, they're trying to harm themselves by looking at these things when they don't need to. So that made me very angry. So I was the psychologist internationally who identified the psychological anguish of something I called Vystopia, which is the mental anguish of being vegan in a non-vegan world, of discovering what really the institutionalized, normalized, legalized abuse of animals. But then when they tell people, instead of people going, "Oh, that doesn't sound right, let me have a look," they laugh, they ridicule, they say, "Don't tell me what to do, don't be ridiculous, the government would never allow it." And so there's that secondary trauma for the vegan, because they then feel separated and not understood by people they love, who are otherwise really good people. They just have not become aware of this. And then the next thing is, well, if I didn't know about that, what else don't I know? And then people are called a conspiracy theorist. So those are the challenges that I had to go through myself. But then in being a psychologist, I'm really a telling witness to some of the psychological pain, really, and emotional pain of living in a world that it's hard to explain to people how much we've all been lied to.
Yeah, I can easily resonate with you on this point because I'm also a vegetarian. I'm not a vegan, but I'm a vegetarian right now. So
Yes.
I know how these things works.
Yes.
And whenever a vegetarian or a vegan person sees animal cruelty, it just hurt you. And when you try to explain this to the people who are being non-veg or they eat animals, sometimes it
Yeah.
backfires to you, right? Like the point you mentioned, it's not easy
Yeah.
to make people understand these points, right? So, is there any story
That's right.
that or experience that you like to share with us from your journey?
From my journey, yeah, well, it's been a very interesting journey, because I haven't always been a vegan, but I was a vegetarian, and it never really bothered me what other people did, really, because the reality is most people don't want to be cruel towards animals. But, I've had a fascinating career in a way. I actually left school when I was 16. And I went out to work, and I went to work in a bank, which was never going to work for me, not being who I am. I was more interested in people. And I've had some fascinating experiences of working in countries that people don't normally. So I was very involved in working in places like Ukraine, Poland, the Middle East. I've been to India, but I haven't worked in India. But, some of those experiences were just the funny stories that I could tell you, many of them, I guess. Perhaps I'll tell you one of them. I was working in Israel, actually, and one of my students was he came in late to a class. And me and my colleagues, we were teaching in a university in London, and we were teaching people, mature students from all walks of life, and business studies and management and those sort of things. But when we saw the actual students, they seemed incredibly mature and experienced. They'd be the head of civil defense or something, or, senior like heads of schools and things. And we're thinking, why are we teaching these people this? Because what have we got to tell them? And one day we suddenly learned, of course, is that it's actually to do with their pay, really. If they could actually have a master's degree, the only way they could do a master's degree was by having a first class undergraduate degree. And very few people, as you know, get a first class degree. And so, but if they did a master's degree, their pay went up 30%. And of course, if you've got a very senior person in the civil defense, that's a really big salary increase. So they started to contact universities abroad, and the colleagues and myself went across to teach them. And on one occasion, this man came in and he was late to the class. And I didn't quite know his job, but I found out that he was the head of the 4 prisons in the Negev desert. And I'm standing there and I said to him, "Excuse me, you're late." I said, "Have you got an excuse for this?" And I said it in a mature way. He wasn't a child. He said, "Well, I've been supervising the transport of the person we think has assassinated the Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin." And I said to him, "I think that's a pretty good excuse." Okay, so it's hard to actually realize that. So I worked in Israel. I've also been to Palestine. We don't have to go into the politics of this. There are good and bad people everywhere. Governments cause problems. And but it was a fascinating experience. And I just thought it was very funny because it was, a very senior person is one of my students teaching. What can I teach him about management when he has 2,000 staff and 8,000 prisoners in the prisons?
So, last but not the least, what is the one advice that you like to share with our audience that you follow in your life?
What would I say is find your why. When we have a big enough why, we can take any how. And so I think it's really, and that was something which was told by a writer who was actually in a Holocaust situation in the Second World War in Europe. And he was caught in a concentration camp. And he said, people that got out actually had a bigger belief in that they would get out. And he said, if you've got a big enough why you're doing something with real purpose in your life, you'll take all sorts of things. Sometimes being unemployed, sometimes pushback, sometimes failure. But if you have that, and that goes alongside with deciding what success is. And I love the definition of success being by the late Earl Nightingale, who said, success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. So each of us must find our worthy ideal. And each day, if we progressively work towards it, although I've only been a vegan psychologist probably about 16 years, I was a psychologist for a long time before then. Before then, I worked in a bank and I worked in different places. But I was always taught that whatever you're going to do in life, you do it to the best of your ability, or else you stand down and let someone else do it. So, often as people are moving towards their dream, maybe they're doing jobs or they're in circumstances that they don't enjoy, and they may be making moves to move out of it. Whatever we're doing, we're usually serving other people. And I think to do that well with respect and know that every time you're doing things to your best of your ability, even if you're in the process of changing, I think then we can sleep at night. And that to me is really important.
Really great. And I think it's something that we all need to follow the why and to know the how of our life, right?
Oh, yes.
Thank you so much, Claire,
Absolutely.
for sharing your stories and journey with us. It was really wonderful for me to know you and to know the differences between being a vegan and how it can help animals and help us to connect with nature. So thank you so much and keep inspiring.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thank you for the opportunity.